DTZ Entertainment Presents Stories That Are Made Up. Welcome. This episode I have a story from my Private Eye Mystery Collection. So sit back and here's Private Eye Sam in The Private Eye Guys, The Dinner Invite. I'm Sam, a retired private eye that moved to the Midwest for the peace and quiet of a small town. So far, the peace and quiet haven't quite worked out yet. Now, with that, I decided to open a private eye business with my friend Old Man Jeb. See, we took Pearl's advice and opened up one. We even used Pearl's suggestion, named the business the Private Eye Guys. We had gotten some business right away because of the local news reporting on the missing residents case that Jeb and I helped solve. We kind of got a small celebrity status going on now. We did do a morning TV news show. The first few months, we got a case of checking for cheating husbands to cheating wives cases. We even had a couple of police cases we helped out on. Business was looking good. Things are doing pretty good for the first few months. Jeb took to being a private eye real well. It impressed me how he seemed to be a natural at the detective work. Like one case Jeb had, his cousin in Ohio, Jeb's cousin Frank, had been having trouble at his store. Jeb told his cousin he would look into his problem. Jeb filled me in. He told me his cousin's business had been missing money and product for months now. The police kept getting dead ends, no leads, so he called Jeb for help. I asked Jeb if he ran through the basic detective questions like, does he have a camera? Is there anyone that has access to the store besides him? Jeb told me he did. I suggested that he go there undercover and do some snooping around himself to get a better feel for the situation that they're in. It only took Jeb a week and a half to solve it. The culprit was the wife's brother. Jeb told his cousin that his brother-in-law had made an imprint of the keys to the store and found a shady locksmith to help him make the keys. Now he could come and go as he pleased. The brother-in-law would come in after hours, take what he wanted, and then go over to the VCR, rewind the tape to the point before he came in, then leave out the side door off camera. Jeb found clues of the missing tape time, along with some background checking of the brother-in-law, that led to Jeb and the police catching him in the act. One morning, Jeb and I were at Pearl's coffee shop talking with Pearl about our latest case we had, when the postman came in and headed towards me and Jeb. The postman held out a clipboard.
I need a signature for this letter.
Jeb signed, and I took the letter. We thanked the postman, and I opened up the envelope. I pulled out the card, and it was an invitation. I showed Jeb the front of the card. It had a castle and a banner over it saying Bauer Castle, 150th anniversary. Jeb looked confused.
An invitation to the Bauer Castle? They only invite the family and the Castle Historian Societies and guests. What does it say on the inside?
I opened the card and the note fell out. It's addressed to the Private Eye Guys. I showed Jeb, then I read the letter out loud. Dear Private Eye Guys, I am personally inviting you to the 150th anniversary party. I need your help. I have a few things your private eye agency has to offer. please accept my invitation. I will fill you in on the rest of this in person. Time and date on card. Hope to see you two gentlemen there. Sincerely, Howard Grimm. I looked at Jeb. He sat back and smiled.
The head of the Grimm Corporation, the oldest import and export of all kinds of antiquities and high-end art. There's a rumor that Howard Grimm has a map to an ancient treasure and he won't look for it 'cause it's cursed, so he has it hidden. He didn't even want anyone to find it 'cause he don't want the curse to happen. I guess it's pretty bad.
Hearing what Jeb said, I'm very interested in going to this castle now. So I finished up my coffee and headed back to the office. Jeb went to get us lunch from the Walden restaurant. Sitting in my office, I looked up on the internet about the Bower Castle. There was a lot of info on the castle and the history of it, but no mention of the map. That makes me suspicious. After a few more web searches, Jeb and lunch finally showed up. As we ate, I told Jeb that there was no mention of the map. Then I told him, Jeb, we will just have to wait till we go to the celebration to find out. The invitation directions were that we had to be at the dock on May 20th by 4 p.m. to take the ferry to the Bower Castle Island, where we will then be escorted to the castle for the celebration. Jeb offered to drive us to the dock. I agreed and planned on being picked up in front of the coffee shop. The morning of the celebration at the castle, I went to the Walden restaurant for breakfast with Pearl. I got there a little late as usual. Pearl was sitting at a table, waving me over. I headed on over and sat down. We ordered, and then I asked Pearl if she had any info about the castle or the Grimm family that isn't well known. She sat there chewing up her toes, thinking. Pearl finally said that she went to school with Jack Grimm, the son of Howard Grimm, who started the Grimm Antiques Import Company. Jack, she said, was your typical boy in school, didn't get into trouble, stayed to himself for the most part. He eventually worked for his dad, she told me. I sat there thinking about this whole thing. Just seems strange. It looks that me and Jeb are going to have to be on alert for everything. Pearl and I finished up breakfast, paid the bill, and then I headed over to the office to check the mail and the phone for messages. Entering the office, I went to my desk and sat down. The phone message light was flashing. I pushed the button and listened to the message. It was Jeb letting me know he'll pick me up at 3 o'clock in front of the coffee shop. Then I went over to the mail slot. Oh, good. No mail. I went back to my desk and looked up some more info on the Bower Castle and the Grimm family. The castle was in financial and disrepair. Problems from the original family that built it. The descendants could not keep up the repairs and the taxes on the castle, so it fell into foreclosure. The castle sat empty on the market for 2 years. That's when the Howard Grimm stepped in and bought the castle and started a massive renovation, keeping with tradition with a few modern upgrades. After 10 years of owning the castle, Howard Grimm filed for historic status and got it. Then a board was formed to overlook the castle. The board of trustees consisted of President Howard Grimm, Vice President Jack Grimm, and 3 other members, Susan Grimm, Beth Kent, and Fran Philman. A classic 5-person board. Once again, no mention of the treasure map. Not even it mentioned as a rumor. Well, maybe Jeb's story is just that, a story. No truth in it at all. You know how rumors can get started and going. So, I'm really perplexed. That's the problem. I'm going to have to wait to get there to find out more info. I looked at the clock on the wall and it was 1:15. I was getting hungry, so I locked up the office and walked down to the Walden restaurant to get something to eat. When getting there, I walked in and sat at the counter and placed my order of tuna sandwich and plain potato chips with a soda. I sat there and reading the local paper and eating when it occurred to me that no price or any type of compensation was discussed. We couldn't work for free. I will have to talk to Jeb about this when he picks me up. Oh man, I gotta get going. It's almost time. I paid the check and headed down to the coffee shop. As I was walking down to the coffee shop, I had seen I had just enough time to get myself 1 cup of coffee. So I ran in and got me a cup of Joe to go. And on the way out, that's when Jeb pulled up. So I hopped in, and on the drive, Jeb and I decided not to talk about the case till we get there, seeing we didn't have no info really to go on or anything. So we couldn't make a plan or any real idea of what to expect. So we just drove and listened to the radio. We pulled into the parking area for the ferry. We were just in time. The ferry had just finished tying up. We walked over to the dock where the loading ramp was for the ferry. Me and Jeb were met by a deckhand with a clipboard. He asked for our names, we gave them to him, then sent us on to get on board the ferry. We took the seat next to the back rail. There were a couple of other people there. I wasn't sure if they were part of the Grimm family or guests like us. No one talked to me or Jeb the whole ferry ride. The ride lasted 45 minutes. As we pulled into the dock, I could see horse-drawn carriages. After we finally finished docking, we were sent to the man at the end of the dock. When me and Jeb got to the end, we were greeted by the butler, Walter Rogers. He assigned us a carriage, and off we were to the castle. The road was cobblestone and lined with pine trees. The ride lasted about 5 minutes or so. Coming up on the castle, we were stopped at the moat and had to wait for the drawbridge to be lowered. We then continued across it into a courtyard. We were all greeted by Howard Grimm and his son Jack. Their maid Gladys Roger was holding a tray with glasses of champagne for everyone. Howard Grimm told Jeb and I to follow him in. He wanted to speak to us in private. We started walking. As we entered the castle, a man approached. He greeted Howard and introduced himself as Dr. Alex, Ph.D., a professor of history at the local university. Howard made a quick greeting, and then we continued down the hallway to his office. Inside the office, he had us all sit down, offering us drinks. Then he began by telling us his concerns for his safety. And before he could say any more about other than being concerned of his safety, there was a knock at the door. The butler, Walter, informed all the guests we have arrived. Howard apologized and said we'd talk shortly. We then headed to the grand room to meet all the guests. Walking in the room, I noticed that the maid scurried down the hall in the other direction. I didn't see where she ended up, but I had to keep going. We were entering the grand room. Howard had Jeb and me sit on the couch against the wall in the corner. I know he did this so we could observe without being exposed to the others. Howard started by greeting everyone by name. He welcomed his son Jack Grimm, his daughter-in-law Susan Grimm, grandson Chance Grimm, granddaughter Sally Grimm. Then he introduced Susan's sister and brother-in-law Beth and Andy Kent, along with their son Larry Kent. He moved on to the introducing Frank and Banson and Terry, more members of the Castle's Preservation Society, along with Dr. Alex, Ph.D., with his two top students, Billy Simon, Jill Wiseman, and Kristen Lace, and local historian Fran Philman. After Howard finished introducing the guests, leaned over towards Jeb. Hey, you think Howard is going to make a long speech?
I hope not. I'm getting hungry, and I'm ready to eat.
I chuckled and shook my head. Then Howard started his speech. He spoke about the grand beginnings of the castle, how the Earl Bauer moved from England to start his own textile factory in the United States, where the Earl tripled his fortune. Earl Bauer wanted to have an isolation place to hide away from everyone at. That's when he went on an intense search and found this island on the lake. He purchased the land around the lake along with the island. Altogether, the property was 100,000 acres. Very excluded. The Earl had the property for 95 years. The Grimm family have owned it for the last 55 years. Howard Grimm talked about some of the VIP guests that have been in the castle. The passion he speaks with about the castle is impressive. Finally, he finished up his speech, and all of the guests went to the dining hall. Walk across to the dining hall. It was a large tile room. It was tall ceilings with floor-to-ceiling windows on one side, many paintings hanging on the other walls. In the center of the room, under two large chandeliers, was a long carved oak dining table with 20 carved chairs around it. We all had assigned seating. At the head of the table, naturally, was the grandfather, Howard Grimm. Then, going clockwise, started Jack, his son. Next to Jack was his wife, Susan Grimm. Then Sandy Grimm, daughter to Jack and Susan. A empty chair. On the other side is the son, Chance Grimm. Next to him, their cousin, Larry Kent, with Larry's mom, Beth Kent, next to him, and her husband, Andy Kent, on the other side of her, with an empty chair between me, sitting the opposite of Howard Grimm at the head of the table. Then continuing clockwise after the empty chair next to me came Dr. Alex, Ph.D., and next to him was his three students in a row, Kristen Lace, Jill Wiseman, and Billy Simon. After Billy followed Fran Philman, the local historian, then Terry Moore and Frank Benson, members of the Castle's Preservation Society. Finally, Jeb, sitting next to Howard, finished out the sitting. For dinner, they served roasted whole pig, lamb, and venison, along with swine, a variety of sides and pies. Wine was served, but I didn't indulge. I just had coffee as usual. I kept my head clear. I had a job to do. That's what I was here for. The way the table was sitting, I had a clear view of everyone down each side, along with the open chairs on each side, where I wouldn't be bothered. All I was to do is observe and see what I'm dealing with. But one little problem. I'm still haven't been told anything by Howard yet except his concerns for his safety. So I mostly listened to the dry conversations and watched faces being stuffed. At this point, no one looked to be plotting, at least right now. Dinner finished and the guests went about the castle to look around. Me and Jeb went with Howard to his office again to try and finish our conversation. We walked down the hall into the office. Howard sat down at the desk, offered Jeb and I a seat in these fancy chairs on each side of his desk. Howard began.
First, thank you for coming. Like I said earlier, someone is out to get me and my map.
Ah, so there is a map. To what era is the treasure?
Well, it's not some ancient treasure. The map is to my personal fortune, or treasure, as some may call it. I had my accountant make 3 investments of my choosing, and all 3 investments paid off big, I'll say. So I took the money in cash and had it put into a sealed box. Treasure chest, if you may. Then I had my most trusted friend take it and hide it. He did make a map to it and put it in an envelope. I took the envelope and put it away. I have never opened it. I do not know where the treasure is, so the map is the only way to find it. You can't ask my friend either. He passed away a few years ago.
Sorry to hear that for your loss, but when was the last time you checked on the envelope?
Also, Howard, does anyone else know about the letter or the envelope, where it may be? And like Jeb said, I'm sorry for your loss.
Well, I can't be sure. Maybe my grandson Chance, but I don't know. Here, I'll get you the envelope for you guys to hold on to. I'll take it back after tonight's party.
As Howard walked over to where he had put the envelope, he explained the money is for a deserving family member. He has not made a decision on who it would be. Just as he was getting to the envelope,
Hey, wait a minute. The envelope is missing. It is not here. What's going on?
well, now that the map is missing, this job now has added another layer to the case. Jeb and Howard started looking around the office to see if the envelope just got moved or is really missing. I needed to use the restroom, so I left Jeb and Howard to search. I walked down the hallway to the restroom. Along the way, I heard a noise in one of the other offices. I continued on to the restroom. I had to really go. When done using the restroom, I decided to check the room I heard the noise coming from. I first listened at the door for a few seconds, then tried the doorknob. It turned. I opened the door. It cracked just enough to listen. Then I opened it up all the way. The room was mostly dark. The only light was a dim night light. I fumbled on the wall and found a light switch. Turning it on, and then on the floor next to the bed was the body of Susan Grimm, the daughter-in-law of Howard. On first look at the body, it looked to be that she died of a stab wound, but I know better than that just to take this at face value. So I grabbed a key to the room off the nightstand and locked the door. Went back down the hall to Howard Grimm's office. When I entered the room, Jeb and Howard were still looking for the envelope. Well, we have another problem, or more like a murder. Jeb and Howard stopped, dead in their tracks, looked at me. Howard had a distressed look on, then asked who was murdered. I told him his daughter-in-law. He sat down and shaking his head in disbelief. After gathering himself, he went on to explain that there was a rumor around the map to try and make it to where people would doubt it and that the map didn't even exist. With that, Howard had thought that his story had got her killed. I told Howard and Jeb to keep the murder quiet. No one is to know, and if anyone asks, she is not feeling well, she's under the weather and laying down. All agreed. I then told Jeb to go through the bedroom and look for clues and keep it quiet. Off Jeb went. I told Howard to return to the party and keep the activities on schedule and act as if nothing has happened. He took a couple pills and a stiff drink and nodded he could do it. I also explained to Howard that this is our best chance to catch the murderer and find the map at the same time. Howard agreed and went back to the party and kept it going. I got ready to head back to the bedroom to check on Jeb. As I walked out of the office, I noticed a feather on the floor next to the bookshelf. I closed the door and took note of it and started walking on down the hallway, checking on Jeb. Entering the bedroom, Jeb was taking notes. I asked if he found anything.
Well, Sam, I ain't quite done yet, but I can tell you she was stabbed and poisoned. The poison was slow acting, and the stab happened shortly after the time of the poisoning.
How do you know she was poisoned?
During my examination of the body, I detected an odor coming from the mouth that resembles a poison I dealt with before.
I looked at Jeb and I told him I have two murderers. Then I told Jeb to keep investigating the murder and I'm going to hunt for the envelope. I went back to the grand room. The party was in full swing. Howard somehow has kept everything going. So far, no one knows anything has happened. While the speeches were going, I started bouncing from table to table, making small talk, gathering info that helped me with the narrowing of the suspects. At one table, I found Dr. Alex, Ph.D. His 3 students had been rehearsing their speeches annoyingly, so Billy Simon, Jill Wiseman, and Kristen Lace all have alibis. I talked with Jack Grimm, Susan's husband. He has been so involved with the planning of the party and keeping everything going and dealing with the caterers that he has no idea that Susan's been missing from the room at all. I talked with Larry Kent, a cousin to the Grimm's family. He complained about Chance Grimm, the son to Susan and Jack. Larry had mentioned that Chance didn't respect his parents and was very selfish and greedy. Larry even complained about the butler hanging around doing nothing. He even said something about his mom and his aunt Susan have been in a dispute last couple of years. So Beth Kent has a motive. Susan's own sister might be involved. This case has a time limit, and time is running out. I look across the room and I seen Jeb talking with Sandy Grimm, the daughter of Susan and Jack. I walked over to and talked with Fran Philman, local historian. She had made a comment about the maid that's been letting the butler do all the work. I also talked with Terry Moore, Castle Preservation Society member, who said that the maid kept disappearing and the butler kept doing more and more work. Now that makes 2 people who have talked about the maid, Gladys Roger. It seems she might be a disgruntled employee. I think it's time to get Jeb and Howard together in the office to see what we all have found out. Then we'll go from there. I walked over to Jeb and let him know to meet me in Howard's office in 20 minutes. Then I wrote a note for Howard and asked Frank Benson of the Castle Preservation Society to hand it to Howard when he was called up to give a speech. He agreed and took the note. A couple minutes later, Howard walked to the back of the room. He nodded at me. We both walked together down to his office. Entering the office, Jeb was already sitting. I walked in the room and seen the feather still on the floor, so I picked it up and then sat down. Jeb started filling us in on what he had found out so far.
Well, I talked to young Sandy. She mentioned that her mom and Aunt Beth had been mad at each other for the longest time now. Then said Howard, your granddaughter, said that her brother Chance has been acting out a lot lately. Has your son talked about Chance acting out?
Well, they don't tell me much. I had no idea. But it looks like we're going to have work a little faster to solve this.
The clock is ticking. I had Howard return to the grand room to keep up appearances. Then I told Jeb to stay on finding the murderer, or murderers, whichever. Just do it quick. Jeb took off. Okay, now I have to find the envelope. So I decided to talk with the butler, Walter. Let's see what he knows. I left the office and started searching for the butler. First, I went to the kitchen, walked down the hallway, and I seen the library door was ajar. It looked to be there might be something on the floor just inside. All of a sudden, then I heard the cook. So I went over to the kitchen door and went on in. I asked the cook if he had seen the butler. He had not. Then I went on to the dining room. Still no luck. Then as I was turned to leave the room, something caught my eye. Outside the window, I walked over and looked a little more and seen the butler. He was sitting on the balcony. I headed on out to talk with the butler. Just as I walked up, he started to apologize about his wife. The maid's not being around more than she has been. I asked him a few questions about the castle, and that surprised him, but he was very willing to tell me how much he knew about the castle. I then asked about a few job-related questions that, when he told me that Gladys had a grudge against Howard, she believed that he had been treating her not right. He then tells me he has to get back to work and walks off. I sat there thinking about that, how he apologized for his wife not working and then how he scurries off. I sat there a couple more minutes mulling that over, and then I started looking into, is the map and the murder one and the same, or we got multiple people in this still? First, I need to see if I can figure out who knew about the map and if they believed in the rumor or if they knew the truth about the map. That's going to be a rough one. The suspicion on who knew the truth is one getting short, but he is not one who took the map. I can say the butler didn't do it for once. But the maid would be the most likely suspect, seeing she spends the most time in the offices of the staff, and it's been suggested that she does have a motive by different people, and by her actions, it does show that she hasn't been too attentive this evening to her duties. Now that could be a ruse to throw us off too, the way they're pointing a finger at her more than one. But we'll keep looking into this. I know what to do. I'm going to go and let Jeb handle the murder questions, and I'm going to take another approach at the maid and the butler. I decided to try my own ruse. I set up where the maid glanced over and would see me talking with the butler, Walter, and when I knew she was watching, I would make gestures as if the butler was telling me stuff about her and setting her up. Started into it. I could see out of the corner of my eye that it was working, and I caught her. She started fidgeting around with things, and she looked nervous. I knew then she had the map. One problem, though. I can't do nothing about that until we solve the murder. I don't think the two are related anymore. But we don't want to tip our hand. I went off and looked for Jeb to see if he had any suspects yet. I found Jeb in the conservatory. I walked in and sat down on the bench next to him. So, Jeb, what have you got so far?
Well, I did have an interesting conversation with Andy Kent, the brother-in-law of Jack and Susan Grimm. He talked about his wife Beth, and he mentioned that Beth was jealous of Susan, how her statute in the society was. He went on to say that at one time Beth, tipsy, mentioned how easy it would be to spike Susan's wine, how she likes to drink it so much she'd never know. He even said that Beth constantly put down Susan.
I gave Jeb a long look for a moment. So you want to put Beth as a suspect for the poisoning then?
This old man's bullshit meter's leading me to think Beth is a good suspect for the poisoning.
I agree. Now, on to the knife. We'll split up and start talking to different Grimm family members. I went to the library. There, I found myself talking with Chance. I discovered that he was not playing with a full deck. He said his mom stole his map and hid it from him somewhere in the castle, and he has been looking everywhere for it. Then he just walked on from me. Me and Jeb met back at the conservatory and discussed what we had discovered. Jeb had found out that Chance Grimm was seen with a Bowie knife on the ferry. He was showing it off to a couple of the crew members on the ferry. Jeb also told me that Chance was overheard making threats about Susan. It seemed that Chance is our suspect for the stabbing, and Beth is our suspect for the poisoning. There's still the matter, though, of the map and the maid. I think if Jeb and I do this right, we should be able to wrap this up, the murder and the missing map, all in one shot. So Jeb and I went to find Howard Grimm to fill him in and get everyone to the grand room. We ended up finding him in the room with Susan. He was just sitting there by her body in a chair looking at her, not saying much. We let Howard know what we wanted from him and how we're sorry still, and that we want everyone in the grand room and we were gonna clear everything up. Howard and Jeb went around the castle to get everyone. I went to Howard's office and I called the local police detective, filled him in on the situation. He told me they'll be there in a half hour. Oh, that surprised me. They have a police boat to get there. I hung up and headed for the grand room, trying to come up with an idea to stall everyone till the police showed up. By the time I walked in the grand room, everyone had been found and counted for. They were all seated, and I went over to Jeb and Howard to fill them in on about the police and how we need to stall. So Howard did a winded introduction.
Ladies and gentlemen, please may I have your attention? We have a situation this evening.
Howard beat around the bush for about 10 to 12 minutes, and then he introduced us.
These two men I'm about to bring up are private investigators that I brought here. I have concerns about my safety now. I'm going to let Sam and Jeb explain everything. Jeb, Sam?
Well, folks, you may be, or maybe not, have noticed there's one person missing from the room, and that person's been murdered.
Folks, Susan Grimm was found in her room stabbed, along with being poisoned. Jeb and I will break down what happened in order and who did it with the proof. First, who poisoned Susan? What brought us to that was the fact that the cook seen Beth Kent over by the wine glasses and then leaving with a full glass. When the cook went over to replace it with another glass of wine, he noticed that there was a residue around where the glass had sit. It was a white powdery residue.
We took a sample of it and had it tested, and it come back as arsenic. We also had Susan's blood tested. It also was positive for arsenic. If you check Beth's bag, you will find a pill bottle with the same powdery residue in it. We'll test it. Go ahead and get that from her.
Now Beth said nothing, just let Jeb and gave it to him. Then Jeb continued.
Well, while Susan was dying from the poison, until she went into a room and got in a very heated argument, got stabbed. The argument happened between Chance and her. Chance blaming her for the treasure map he claimed she stole. He didn't believe that she didn't have it, so as he got angrier, he stabbed her in the chest twice, and then he hid the knife. But we found it in the bushes just outside the window of his room where he was standing in, along with the blood of Susan on the knife. Chance's fingerprints we also had found on the handle, and we have everything kept for evidence.
Just as Jeb was finishing, the police showed up. The police detective told everyone to stay where they were. No one was to leave the room. Now, standing with Howard and the detective, Jeb began to fill them in. I noticed the maid looking nervous and trying to find a way out of the room, so I decided to call her out. Hey there, Gladys. Gladys Rogers. Where are you trying to go? How about you come up here and tell the detectives how you stole Howard Grimm's map to his hidden fortune? I'm sure Walter wouldn't mind telling the detectives. After I said that, she glanced at the detectives and then put her head down and started walking towards the police detective. We then pointed out to the police officers who they were to arrest. One officer handcuffed Beth Kent and the other officer handcuffed Chance Grimm. The maid ended up coming clean and admitting to taking the map and hiding it in her quarters in her clothes bag. After an officer retrieved the map and returned it to Howard, me and Jeb decided to stay the night at the castle. The next morning, when me and Jeb awoke, we went and found Howard. We sat with him and he explained how the police and detectives finished up the case and took everyone that was guilty off to be processed. Then we told Howard about how our expenses and our pay would need to be done. We had a short conversation. Howard agreed to our bill and the payment. He went ahead and wrote us the check and escorted us out to the carriages. We both entered the carriage and rode on to the ferry. On the ferry, we just had a chuckle with each other about how well the case went and solved quickly, and how our first check we got a big payout. That made us feel accomplished. Thank you for listening. This has been another story from the Private Eye Mystery Collection. This has been Private Eye Sam and the Private Eye Guys, the Dinner Invite. This has been a DTZ Entertainment production of Stories That Are Made Up.